They told him the fire had taken everything, his brothers in arms and the warhorse that had carried him through hell. For 3 years, Ethan Ward lived with that loss, alone in the frozen silence of the Sierra Nevada. Until one blizzard-strangled night, his headlights cut across a mound of disturbed snow. And what he unearthed should have been impossible: a scarred black stallion, barely alive, chained and discarded like refuse. Yet unmistakably the companion he had mourned as dead. Saving him was only the beginning. What followed would drag Ethan into a web of cruelty, betrayal, and blood, where the line between man and beast, loyalty and vengeance, blurred with every single breath. The storm had rolled in from the Pacific 2 days earlier, and by nightfall the town of Truckee was buried under its weight. Snow pressed down on the rooftops like the hand of a giant, sagging beams and creaking chimneys under the immense pressure. Interstate 80 had been shut down since noon, stranding truckers and travelers in a frozen purgatory. The few street lamps still burning cast weak halos of yellow light, halos that were swallowed by the sweeping drifts before they could reach more than a few feet. The world had dissolved into a white void. Only the wind seemed alive, keening through the pines with a voice like a wounded thing. Ethan Ward told himself he'd seen worse storms than this. He'd been shot at, shelled, burned by desert sun and chilled by desert nights. At 41, his body was a ledger of scars from Iraq and Afghanistan, a veteran who'd come home with more ghosts than plans. He'd chosen a cabin deep in the timber country, a wooden shell half buried in drifts every winter, warmed by a stove and nothing else. He wanted solitude, or maybe punishment. Out here, there were no reporters, no therapists, no comrades drinking themselves numb. Only snow, trees, and a silence that bit as hard as the wind. But this storm felt different. The cold wasn't just harsh, it was unnatural. It pressed into his bones in a way that reminded him of nights crouched in ruined houses in Kandahar, waiting for something to explode. His old Chevy pickup rattled and groaned as it crawled down the logging trail. The truck was nearly as scarred as he was, but it was loyal. Tonight, it bore him into the heart of the blizzard, its headlights cutting tunnels through the snow, beams swallowed only yards ahead. Branches clawed at the glass, the heater blew lukewarm air. The radio whispered static, then died. The silence that followed was suffocating. Out here, in the belly of the storm, it felt like he was the only living thing moving through the Sierra. He kept driving, eyes narrowed. It was an old instinct, the one that told him never to stop moving, never to become a target. The army had taught him to fight forward, and he still lived by that rhythm, even when there was nothing ahead but more trees. Visibility shrank until the world was a tunnel of white. The road disappeared. The pickup lurched, tires spinning before catching again. It was the same as combat patrols in alleyways where every doorway could hide a sniper. Except now, nature's hand was on the trigger. The blizzard wasn't just weather, it was a battlefield. And that was when the beam of his headlight swept across something odd in the snow. At first he thought it was nothing. A shadow, a mound drifted by the wind. But then the truck rolled past, and he saw it again in the rearview mirror. A depression in the drift along the roadside. Too neat, too defined. He slowed, backing the pickup until the lights fell full across it. The mound was wrong. The snow there didn't lie smooth, but had a lumpy surface, as though something had been buried and the wind hadn't had time to finish the job. The soldier's instinct hit like an electric shock. This wasn't natural. He considered driving on, letting the storm bury whatever secrets it wanted. But the feeling gnawed at him. He had learned in the war that when something felt wrong, it usually was. And ignoring that voice was how men died. Ethan slammed the truck into park. He grabbed his flashlight, pulled his coat tighter, and shoved the door open. The wind hit him instantly, snowflakes stinging like buckshot. He cursed, his boots crunching into the drifts as he stepped into the night. The flashlight beam sliced through the snow, catching the edges of the depression. He trudged forward, sinking shin deep, his free hand resting near the pistol tucked under his jacket. Out of habit. He stopped a few feet from the mound. The snow was churned in a way that spoke of movement, not just wind. Something had been placed here, hidden. The snow burned his fingertips long before he touched what lay beneath. He crouched over the depression, flashlight beam jittering. He shoved his gloves off, needing to feel. The moment his bare skin met the snow, the cold bit deep, sharp as broken glass. He didn't care. He dug. The first handfuls were powder and ice. Then the crust hardened, and he had to claw through it, nails splitting, skin scraping raw. Blood welled around one thumb, freezing into a little red jewel. The wind shrieked in tones that almost sounded like laughter. He told himself he was insane, but his gut refused to let him walk away. His fingers brushed something that wasn't snow. It felt like fabric at first, coarse and stiff. He froze, heart slamming against his ribs. He pressed again, harder. Not cloth, not bark. Something rough, with the stubborn texture of hair. Fur. Ethan yanked his hand back as though burned, staring at the shallow pit. It couldn't be. He had to be wrong. No animal could be buried alive in this cold. And yet... He jammed both hands in, tearing at the snow with desperate force. Flurries exploded. The depression grew, revealing a curved shape beneath. His flashlight beam steadied on it at last. Black, coarse, hardened with ice. A flank. His stomach dropped. "Oh, Christ," he whispered. A body, huge, and still warm because the surface twitched under his hand. He dug faster, frantic now, until more of the shape emerged. The barrel of a chest, thin and wasted. A rib cage, so prominent it looked carved from bone. The impossible became real before his eyes. A horse, black as the storm's shadows, entombed in snow. It was alive. Barely. Each breath was a shallow rattle, a faint mist puffing from flared nostrils and vanishing instantly. Its chest heaved with an effort that looked like it might break him. When his light swept further, the sight gutted him. Scars ridged the hide, raw grooves cut deep where chains had eaten into flesh. Knife slashes, puckered welts, bruises layered on bruises. This animal had not merely been abandoned, it had been punished, tortured. Ethan's hands shook so badly he dropped the flashlight. It rolled, casting crazed arcs of light until he caught it again and forced it back onto the animal's face. Two eyes, half shut and rimmed with frost, blinked weakly at him. They were dull, almost blind. Yet when the beam struck them, they stirred, and in them was a flicker of something he thought he would never see again. He stumbled backward, the light quivering. His chest felt hollow. There on the horse's left shoulder, visible even beneath the grime and blood, was a scar he knew better than his own reflection. A jagged streak of white tissue from barbed wire years ago. It couldn't be. But it was. Storm Rider. The name hit his mind like thunder. Storm, his warhorse, his comrade, his shadow in the desert heat of Iraq. The one creature that had carried him through fire when men had fallen. Storm had died. He'd seen the flames himself when the training compound burned. The official report said the stables collapsed before any animals could be saved. He had mourned, grieved, buried that chapter with every bottle drained in the cabin. But here was Storm, alive, scarred, mutilated, and buried in the goddamn snow like garbage. His throat closed. He wanted to scream, to demand an answer from the storm itself. Instead, he fell to his knees. Who the hell would do this? The question tore out of him, raw and broken. He reached with shaking fingers, brushing the stiff, ice-encrusted mane. Storm stirred faintly, a low rumble deep in his chest. The eyes flickered open again, cloudy but searching. For an instant the veil lifted and recognition sparked. Ethan's breath caught. "It's you." His voice cracked. He pressed his forehead against the horses, tears stinging, freezing as they fell. "It's really you." He couldn't leave him here. He would never leave him again. Ethan staggered to his feet. His truck sat yards away, engine rumbling. The animal was massive, weakened but still weighing nearly 1,000 pounds. The odds of moving him alone were impossible, but he tried anyway. He fetched rope from the truck bed, looped it beneath the horse's girth, and dug his boots into the snow. Every pull shredded his muscles, his back screaming. Storm groaned, collapsing sideways, but Ethan braced, lifted, dragged again and again. His palms tore open, bleeding freely. "Come on, boy, come on." At last, inch by inch, he heaved Storm toward the truck. He jammed blankets across the bed, then hauled with everything left in him. The final shove nearly broke his spine, but the horse collapsed into the truck bed with a crash of steel against hooves. Ethan doubled over, vomiting bile into the snow, shaking so hard he could barely stand. But when he lifted his head, he saw Storm's chest still rising. Weak, but alive. That was enough. He climbed into the driver's seat, hands slick with blood and ice. The truck's engine whined, tires spinning before catching. He leaned sideways, one hand still gripping the wheel, the other reaching back, fingertips brushing Storm's trembling mane through the rear window. "Not again, boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're not leaving me again." The neon sign of the Truckee Veterinary Clinic buzzed faintly, a sickly green glow blurred by the snow. Ethan's truck fishtailed into the lot, and he slammed the brakes. He stumbled out and ran to the bed. Storm lay there, sides heaving in shallow jerks. "No, no, stay with me." Desperation lent Ethan strength no battlefield ever had. He heaved the horse's neck higher, pulling, staggering toward the clinic door. The glass door flew open. A rush of warm air collided with the storm. Rosa Delgado had not expected anything more than silence. At 31, her body was used to exhaustion, long nights alone in the clinic. Her dark hair was knotted back, her eyes holding the hollow shadow of weeks without rest. But when the door banged open, she froze. A man stumbled through, massive shoulders bent under the burden of something impossibly large. His beard was crusted with ice, his parka streaked red and brown. In his arms, draped like some fallen monument, was a horse. "Dios mío," she whispered. "What happened to him?" The man's face was grim. "No time," he barked. "He's dying. Help me." Instinct overtook shock. Rosa spun, shoving the inner door wide. "Back room, now. Dr. Monroe." Helen Monroe emerged from the treatment hall like a figure carved from steel. At 52, she had lost any illusions about mercy in her line of work. She wore a lab coat over a heavy sweater, her eyes burning with command. She didn't waste a second on questions. One glance at the blood, the frost, the ribs like knives under the hide, and she snapped into motion. "On the table, now." Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the storm. "Rosa, fluids, heat blankets, IV line. Move." Ethan laid the horse on the steel table. The clang rang out like a gunshot. Rosa was already running, snatching IV bags, her arms laden with blankets warm from the dryer. Helen's hands swept across the animal with clinical speed. Severely dehydrated, malnourished, frostbite, multiple old injuries, knife cuts, chains. Her jaw tightened. He's barely holding on. But he's still here. Ethan hadn't moved from the horse's side, one hand tangled in the frozen mane. "I'm not leaving him," he said, and the way he said it stopped Rosa short. It wasn't stubbornness, it was a vow. "Keep talking to him," Helen said. "Let him hear you." Ethan bent low, his lips near the twitching ear. "Stay with me, boy. Just breathe. I've got you now." Storm's body jerked faintly, and Ethan's breath shook with the weight of it. The treatment room became its own sealed world. Fluorescent lights flooded the space. The horse's shallow breaths came in a syncopated rhythm with the drip of saline into the IV line. Each pause stretched like an eternity. Ethan's vision blurred. He wasn't seeing the table anymore. He was back 3 years earlier. The compound, the Nevada sun, the fire. He remembered the roar as the storage barn went up like a torch. Storm had screamed, an ear-splitting trumpet of defiance as he barreled through flame and falling timbers. Ethan had sprinted after him, lungs filling with black smoke. Then the ceiling crashed. When he woke in the hospital, they told him there were no survivors. The horse perished. For 3 years, Ethan carried that silence as a wound. And now, that silence lay breathing faintly under his hands. Storm shuddered violently. "Easy, boy. I'm here," Ethan whispered. Helen steadied the IV. Rosa draped another blanket. Steam rose faintly where warmth met frost. Minutes crawled into hours. At last, Helen stepped back. "We've done what we can," she said quietly. "Now it's up to him." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan bowed his head, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Inside, the world narrowed to the faint rise and fall of one battered chest. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan allowed himself to hope. But hope was a fragile thing. The hours stretched thin. Ethan hadn't moved, his eyes fixed on the slow rise and fall of Storm's ribcage. Each breath seemed borrowed, a thread stretched to breaking. Then it happened. The horse's eyelid twitched, barely perceptible, a tiny shiver of lashes crusted with frost. Ethan froze, his breath snagging. The lid fluttered again. Come on, boy, come on. And then the eyes opened, not wide, not clear, but heavy, clouded orbs that found him in the light. They locked on him, as though no time had passed. The horse exhaled a weak groan. With staggering effort, he lifted his head, nostrils quivering, until his muzzle found Ethan's palm. Ethan shot upright, catching the muzzle in both hands, clutching it as if anchoring himself to the world. "It's me, boy," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I'm here." Storm pressed weakly against him. The gesture was unmistakable. Recognition. The dam inside Ethan cracked. Tears welled, hot, streaming into his beard. He had faced IEDs and ambushes without his voice ever shaking. But now his throat burned, a sob catching as he held that scarred muzzle. "God, you found me. Or I found you. Doesn't matter. We're here." The horse's breath shuddered over his hands. The years of grief, guilt, and silence broke open. Rosa stood frozen at the edge of the room. She had witnessed reunions before, but never this. It wasn't ownership. It wasn't even companionship. It was blood. A tether, invisible yet unbreakable. The door creaked. Both Ethan and Rosa spun toward the sound. In the crack of the door stood a small figure. Isabel, Izzy, 8 years old, Rosa's daughter. She clutched a workbook to her chest, her pink knit hat tugged low, her round eyes glimmered with fear and wonder. "Mama," the girl's small voice trembled. "Is he going to die?" Rosa froze. No answer came. Ethan turned, his weathered face softened by the child's gaze. "Not tonight," he said, his voice steady and solemn. Izzy's eyes flickered to him, then back to the horse. She knew fear. She had carried it for a year, ever since Rusty, her little pony, vanished from the backyard. One morning, his halter was empty, the gate swinging wide. No tracks, no explanation. Since then, she had avoided barns, unable to face the emptiness. Now she stood inches from a full-grown stallion, a black mountain of an animal scarred and battered. Her legs trembled, but then the horse moved. Storm turned his head, his heavy eyes landing on the small figure. There was no anger, no wildness, only a weary sorrow. Izzy's breath hitched. She took one hesitant step closer. "Can I touch him?" Her voice was small. Ethan glanced at Rosa, then back to the girl. He nodded slowly. "He's gentle. Always has been." Izzy stepped closer. Storm shifted weakly, and with the last scrap of strength he could summon, lifted his muzzle just enough to press against her shoulder. Izzy gasped. The warmth, the weight, the breath against her ear. Her wide eyes brimmed, then lit up. She smiled, trembling but radiant. "He's not scary," she whispered. "He's kind." Rosa's lips parted in disbelief. For a year, her daughter had shrunk from horses. And here she stood pressed against the muzzle of a stallion, laughing softly through tears. In that moment, Rosa understood. This horse wasn't just Ethan's salvation. He was her daughter's too. "He likes me," Izzy giggled. "He does." Ethan's voice was gravelly but gentle. "He likes you very much." The three of them stood together, bound not by blood, but by the battered heartbeat of a horse who refused to die. And in the howl of the Sierra Nevada blizzard, a new family began to take shape. But the storm that had brought them together was nothing compared to the one that was coming. The morning broke dull and grey. The blizzard had loosened its grip, leaving the town cocooned in silence. Ethan guided his old pickup down the logging trail, back to the spot. This was the place where he had clawed a miracle from a grave someone else had dug. The snow was deceptively clean now, but Ethan knew signs lived beneath. He began to search. At first, there was nothing. Then his boot struck metal. He crouched, brushing away powder, until rusted links gleamed back. A length of chain, half buried, its end twisted and broken. One jagged edge was darkened with the unmistakable stain of old blood. His gut clenched. This wasn't just a stray tether. This chain had been used, and not kindly. A few meters away, he found more. A broad rectangle pressed into the earth beneath the snow, the size of a small pen or portable corral. He could almost see it. Storm confined here, ribs cutting against bars, chained and waiting. Then he saw the tracks, parallel lines cut deep, half smeared by the storm, but still there. Not a car, not a pickup. These belonged to a trailer, a stock hauler. Someone had been here, someone had unloaded, imprisoned, and then left him to die. Storm hadn't wandered into the woods and collapsed. He had been delivered here, caged and buried alive. Fury surged through him. Driving back toward town, the chain sat heavy on the seat beside him. The scars on Storm's body made sense now. Knife cuts, whip marks, the grooves from chains. Someone had tortured him, then tried to erase him. He rolled into the vet clinic lot, his knuckles white. Inside, Rosa was gently coaxing warm water into the stallion's mouth. She looked up and paused when she saw the hard lines carved into Ethan's face. He set the chain on the counter with a dull clatter. I found where they kept him. A pen, chains, tire tracks. Someone didn't just abandon him. They tried to erase him. Rosa's hands tightened. When the horse settled, she finally answered, her voice hushed. I wondered when you'd see it too. Ethan blinked. See what? For months, she began, her dark eyes ringed with fatigue. Animals have been disappearing around Truckee. Horses, dogs, cattle. At first, everyone blamed storms or predators, but it kept happening. Too many. Her hands twisted the hem of her cardigan. A year ago, Izzy's pony vanished. We searched everywhere. Not a single track, just gone. And then I started hearing whispers. People say, Rosa whispered, the animals are taken, stolen, shipped south to Mexico for fighting rings. Her voice trembled on the last words, a blood sport. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's chest tightened as the image formed. Storm, chained, cut, trained for brutality, then discarded when he wouldn't break. The scars screamed the truth. If it's true, Ethan's voice was low, then they're not just thieves, they're executioners, and they're still out there. By midday, Ethan was across from Deputy Ray Dalton at the sheriff's station. Dalton was a lean man whose face bore the habit of caution. Ethan dropped the chain on the desk. He slid photos of the tracks across. This wasn't an accident, and this isn't just one horse, there's a ring out there. Dalton stared at the chain, his face carefully neutral. Ethan, snow covers tracks quick. What you've got there could be old ranch junk. Ghosts in a storm. You know better, Ethan's voice sharpened. You've heard the stories. Animals missing. He mentioned the whispers, the rumors of fighting rings in Mexico. Dalton's head jerked up. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe even fear. But it vanished, smoothed into practiced calm. Rumors don't make cases, he said finally. We can't chase shadows while half the town's still digging out. We'll make a note in your report. That's all we can do. The conversation was over. Outside, the air hit colder than before. Dalton's face replayed in Ethan's mind. The flicker, the hesitation. That wasn't ignorance, that was fear. Or worse, knowledge. Something rotten lived under Truckee's frozen skin, and Deputy Dalton wasn't about to help uncover it. Fine, Ethan muttered, turning the ignition. I'll find it myself. The clinic's small treatment room felt heavy, thick with the smells of antiseptic and wet horsehair. Ethan sat hunched in a corner, eyes hard as granite. Dalton's evasions gnawed at him. The deputy wasn't protecting the town. He was protecting someone else. Rosa busied herself with Storm, but each time she glanced at Ethan, he saw the same thought mirrored in her eyes. In the corner, Izzy sat curled on a chair, her doll clutched tight. The silence felt brittle, as though a single word might shatter it. It was Izzy who finally broke it. Her small voice wavered, almost too soft to hear. Kids at school. They talk about a cabin in the woods, with a crooked chimney. The words fell into the silence like stones into a well. Ethan's head snapped up. His gaze locked on the girl. Go on, he said quietly. Izzy's voice trembled. They say at night you can hear horses crying and metal rattling, like cages. Rosa stiffened, pulling her daughter close. Izzy, that's just stories. But Ethan's stare didn't soften. He leaned forward, eyes burning. Where did you hear this? On the playground. Some kids said their brothers saw it when they went hunting near the river. The words twisted inside Ethan like a knife. He closed his eyes, pulling the map of the logging trails back into his mind. He remembered it, an old half-collapsed cabin from the timber days. The one detail that had stuck with him was the chimney, leaning like a broken tooth. The crooked chimney. This wasn't playground fantasy. She had just pointed him to a place he already knew was real. A chill swept down his spine. The chains, the tire tracks, the pen, they were pieces of a puzzle. And now Izzy had handed him the corner piece. He stood up, the chair legs scraping loud against the tile. I need to see that place. Rosa stared at him. You can't. You don't know what's there. If Storm was dumped out there, if that's where they keep them, Ethan growled, then it's already worse, and it won't stop. They'll do it again. Ethan, you barely survived last night. But his face told her everything. The decision had been made. When he turned to grab his coat, Rosa's voice cut sharp through the room. You can't face this alone. He stopped, turning back. She stood tall now, arms crossed, her exhaustion and worry burned away, leaving something fierce. You heard my daughter, Rosa said, her voice shaking but steady. If there's truth in those stories, then they didn't just take Storm. They might have taken Izzy's pony too. I need answers as much as you. He had expected fear, resistance. He hadn't expected fire. He saw her not as a weary vet tech, but as a mother, sharpening her fear into defiance. He gave a single slow nod. All right, but we move careful. No mistakes. A hollow thud startled them both. They turned. In his stall, Storm was pushing himself upright. His legs trembled, his ribs shuddered. But he stood. Storm, Ethan breathed, moving to steady him. Easy, boy. You're not ready. But the horse shook his head violently. He took one faltering step, then another. His body swayed, but his eyes, clouded and tired, shone with intent. He turned toward the door, ears pinned toward the forest beyond the walls. Then he let out a low, rolling whicker. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. He knows. Ethan's voice was low, reverent. He remembers. Storm stamped once, as if to punctuate it. The stallion wasn't asking permission any more than Ethan had. He was going. The sky had darkened into a heavy slate by the time they were ready. Ethan loaded blankets, rope and flashlights into the truck. Rosa emerged with a first aid kit, and after a long pause, a pistol. My ex-husband's, she said simply. He left it behind. Maybe for a reason. The hardest moment came when Rosa crouched before Izzy, promising she would be back. Storm stepped into the truck bed with a groan, his breath puffing white in the frigid dusk. Rosa climbed into the cab, her face pale but resolved. Ethan started the engine, the headlights cutting twin tunnels into the night. The storm hadn't ended. It had only shifted. And now, with a broken horse, a determined mother, and his own ghosts riding with him, Ethan Ward drove toward the crooked chimney. Toward answers. Toward a fight he already knew would change everything. The night was sharp and clear. Moonlight spread like silver across the snow. Ethan led the way on foot, rifle held tight. Beside him, Rosa kept low, her eyes wide but steady. Then the cabin appeared. It rose from the tree line like a scar, its roof sagging, the crooked chimney leaning like a broken tooth. Light seeped through the cracks in the walls, the orange flicker of a fire. The air carried a stench the storm could not disguise. Burnt wood, rusted iron, and the sour musk of trapped animals. Then the sounds came. The thud of hooves striking wood. Muffled, high-pitched cries that clawed at the chest, and beneath it all, the metallic clatter of chains rattling against steel cages. They're in there, Rosa whispered. More of them. Ethan's eyes were cold as moonlight. Not for long. Two men patrolled outside. The first, tall and wiry, lit a cigarette. The second, broader, paced, knocking the butt of his gun against the porch rail. Their guard was dull. They were too certain no one would dare wander into these woods. As they circled, Ethan noted the gap they left behind, a blind spot at the rear where the shadows pulled thick. He gestured to Rosa. She nodded. They moved low across the snow, pressing themselves against the fallen trunk of a massive pine. The guards' crude jokes drifted on the wind. When one guard peeled away toward the tree line, Ethan moved. He surged from the snow with lethal precision, his arm snapping around the man's throat, dragging him back into the shadows. The cigarette sizzled out in the snow. Ethan pressed the rifle barrel to his temple. "Don't!" One sharp slam of the rifle butt to the back of the head, and the man went limp. The broader man had turned, suspicion dawning. His rifle snapped up. Rosa didn't think. She only moved. With a ragged cry, she darted from cover, swinging a makeshift wooden club with both hands. The wood connected with the guard's knee with a crack that split the silence. He roared, stumbling, lunging at her. But Ethan was already there. His boot slammed into the man's chest. He toppled backward, and Ethan drove the rifle butt down across his jaw. The crunch echoed sharp as ice breaking. The guard slumped unconscious. Rosa staggered back, chest heaving. In her eyes burned something fierce, a spark she hadn't known lived inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting. A sound split the night, a whinny, low and raw. From the tree line, a dark shape broke free, charging. Storm. The stallion thundered across the snow, his frame gaunt, his stride uneven, but his eyes blazed. Another man burst from the cabin door, gun raised. He barely had time to register the blur of muscle and fury before Storm slammed into him. The horse's teeth sank into the man's arm, ripping him from his balance. The man's scream was torn from his lungs as he crashed into the snow. Ethan was on him in an instant, boot crushing his chest, rifle leveled between his eyes. "Don't move." The man froze, his face contorted with pain and terror. Rosa stared at Storm, tears pricking her eyes. The stallion stood over the fallen guard, his ribs stark in the moonlight, but there was fire in him still. "You're still a warrior," Ethan whispered, pressing his palm to the trembling neck. Storm snorted, stamping the snow in answer. Ethan bound the unconscious men. Rosa stood watch. From inside the cabin came the panicked cries of trapped horses. "They know we're here," she whispered. Ethan checked his rifle, sliding the bolt with a metallic click. "Stay sharp. This ends tonight." They turned together, the soldier, the mother, the battered stallion, facing the cabin. The firelight flickered through the cracks, spilling across the snow like blood. Ethan nodded once. "Let's finish this." The cabin door banged open. A man filled the doorway, massive, thick-shouldered, his eyes black and pitiless. Reed Lawson. Behind him, two more men dragged iron cages. Inside, horses tossed their heads weakly. Lawson surveyed the scene, his lips twisting into a smirk. "Well, well, looks like you found my little ranch." "You buried my horse alive," Ethan growled, rifle leveled. "And you think I'll let you walk?" Lawson's grin widened. "That beast was supposed to be gone years ago. Guess I'll finish the job myself." The standoff shattered with a crack of gunfire. One of Lawson's men raised his weapon. Ethan dove sideways, snow exploding as the bullet tore past, grazing his shoulder with a searing burn. "Take them down!" Lawson roared. Chaos erupted, the clearing filled with muzzle flashes, the staccato rhythm of shots. Horses screamed inside their cages. Rosa saw another gunman, rifle aimed squarely at Ethan as he struggled to rise. "No!" she screamed and charged. Her club swung in a desperate arc, striking the man's wrist with a crack. His weapon flew into the drifts. He howled and Ethan rolled, bringing his rifle to bear. A muzzle flash lit the night. The man staggered and collapsed. Then Lawson himself leveled his revolver, his aim fixed on Ethan. "Ethan!" Rosa shrieked. She launched herself sideways, colliding with him just as the revolver boomed. The bullet split the air, embedding in the log wall inches from where Ethan's chest had been. She had saved his life. Lawson cursed, tossing aside the empty revolver. From his belt, he drew a wide hunting blade, the steel gleaming. He charged. Ethan tried to bring his rifle up, but the distance closed too quickly. The knife arced down, and Storm moved. The stallion surged forward, a scream tearing from his throat. He threw his body between Ethan and the blade. The steel scraped down his flank, opening a line of red against black hide. Blood spattered across the snow, steaming in the cold. No! Ethan's cry was raw. Storm held his ground, muscles quivering, eyes blazing. Lawson stumbled back, then lunged again, blade flashing. Ethan dropped to one knee, rifle butt against his shoulder, barrel leveled. For an instant the world slowed. He squeezed the trigger. The gunshot roared. Lawson jerked, the knife slipping from his grasp. His body twisted, then crashed into the snow. Silence slammed down. The echoes faded, leaving only the pant of exhausted lungs and the whimpers of trapped horses. Lawson lay still, eyes open but unseeing. The last of Lawson's men froze, dropping his rifle. He raised both hands slowly. Ethan bound the man's wrists with brutal efficiency. "On your knees," he snapped. Rosa hurried to Ethan's side, pressing a strip of cloth to his shoulder wound. "You're bleeding." "So is he." Ethan tilted his head toward Storm, who stood trembling, blood streaking down his side. The hum of engines broke the stillness. Headlights cut through the trees. Doors slammed. "Hands where I can see them." Sheriff Colton Briggs strode into the firelight, his presence as commanding as the badge on his chest. Deputies fanned out behind him. Ethan lowered his weapon. "It's over." Briggs scanned the scene. Lawson's body, the bound men, Rosa, Ethan, and the bleeding stallion. Recognition flickered across the sheriff's face. He stepped closer, his eyes softening as they fell on the horse. "Hell," he muttered. "Didn't think I'd ever see this one again." Ethan pushed the cabin door open. The stench hit him first. Ammonia, rot, and despair. Cages stretched wall to wall, jammed so close there was barely space to walk. Horses filled them, emaciated, their coats caked with mud and blood, their eyes wide with terror. A foal shivered in one corner, its tiny body bearing raw patches from ropes. Rosa pressed both hands to her mouth, choking back a sob. Ethan's fists clenched. Some of the horses still wore halters with names carved into the leather, proof they'd been stolen straight from families around Truckee. Behind him, Briggs stepped in, his jaw tight. "Get them out," he barked to his deputies. "Blankets, water, now, move." It wasn't just a crime scene, it was a slaughterhouse that had been stopped just in time. The sound that pierced through the chaos was small and human. "Izzy, stay by the truck," a deputy called, but the girl had already slipped past him. She skidded to a stop in the cabin doorway, eyes wide, then something in the far corner caught her gaze. "Rusty," she cried. The pony was little more than bones and tangled mane, but at the sound of her voice his ears flicked, and he staggered forward against the bars. Izzy ran, flinging her arms around his neck through the gaps. "I missed you so much," she sobbed into the matted hair. A deputy's bolt cutters snapped the chain. The door swung open, and Rusty collapsed into Izzy's embrace, his muzzle burrowing into her shoulder as if the year apart had been a bad dream. And this, finally, was waking. Rosa wrapped them both in her arms and wept. Ethan stood back, one hand on Storm's neck. Firelight danced off the blood on Storm's flank, but it softened when he saw the child and her pony. He leaned close to Storm's ear. "Looks like we both got our miracles, boy." By the time the deputies finished, the snow shone blue and red with patrol lights. Word had flown through town, and faces began to appear at the edge of the trees. Ranchers, families with halters and hope in their hands. Truckee's night became a strange mixture of grief and celebration. Some found the horses they'd feared were gone forever. Others stood staring at nothing, knuckles white around empty lead ropes. Ethan, Rosa, and Izzy sat on a bank of snow, Storm and Rusty, close enough to touch. The Sierra Nevada sky seemed wider now, as if the storm had been broken open and the night itself was exhaling. "It's not over," Rosa murmured, her palm on Rusty's ribs, "but it's a start." Spring came quietly. A year spun its length, laying down a layer of ordinary days over the wound of that winter night, until something like peace took root. On the edge of Truckee, a small homestead lifted out of the grass. A line of white fence, straight and clean, a new wooden barn. Ethan hammered boards into a trough, sleeves rolled up. Rosa held the other end of the plank steady, laughter in her eyes. In the yard, Izzy rode Rusty in a steady loop, her back straight, her hands gentle. Storm stood by the gate and watched. Time and good hay had filled his frame again. The scar along his flank remained, a pale reminder. He was not the wild warhorse he had been, nor the haunted skeleton from the snow. He was something wiser. He took the front corner of the fence every dusk and morning, his eyes soft and deep. When Izzy dropped a brush, Storm was there, placing himself just right, offering a shoulder for a small hand to hold. He was anchoring a life. One night, after Izzy fell asleep, Ethan stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. The air held a cool edge that promised stars. Rosa joined him, sliding his jacket over his shoulders before he could protest. "You never remember this part," she said, smiling. They stood shoulder to shoulder, listening to the small sounds of a place at rest. The rustle in the pines, the soft thump of Rusty shifting in his stall. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for years. "From that snowstorm night," he said, his voice low, "I didn't just find my horse. I found a home." Rosa laced her fingers through his and rested her head against him. "You kept the promise," she murmured. Storm turned at the sound of their voices and looked back. Moonlight caught in his eyes, so they seemed to hold their own stars. He flicked an ear, breathed once, and went on watching the road. The wind came down off the mountains, not with the bite of a blizzard, but with a gentler hand. It carried the scent of pine and clean earth. This time, the night did not feel like an empty country. It felt like shelter. It felt like the answer to a question that had been asked in snow and blood. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of survival and justice.